Steven, you didn't spill any beer on the R5 when you put it in the fridge, did you?
Whoops.
Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com here with a video to test out a brand new firmware for the Canon EOS R5. This is firmware version 1.1. Now, Canon did not send us the actual firmware because maybe they were worried that we would give it to everybody. So instead, they sent us a brand new R5 with the 1.1 firmware on it, which gives us 3 of these cameras, and you still don't have yours. We got 3 of them. You got none. Anyway, we sat down for a video conference call with the people at Canon so that they could tell us about the firmware. And the first question we asked, did this solve whatever the overheating issues are in the R5? And the answer was crickets. They couldn't really answer that. What they could tell us was we are seeing some changes in certain situations, and one situation in particular, which is indoors in a specific temperatured environment. So when asked about recording times outdoors, they couldn't really tell us anything about it, but that's why they sent us the camera with the 1.1 firmware on it so that we could take it outside, test it against the one with 1.0, against the one with 1.1, and see how the results turned out. Now, before we get to that, this camera that I'm looking at and pointing at right now is the Canon EOS R5 with the 1.1 firmware. We are shooting 8K all eye, correct, Steven? Yes, all eye on this one and all eye on the one with 1.0 firmware, and the camera in the back that is recording the back screen of these will never overheat because it's a Nikon Z6.
Sick burn.
In terms of 1.1 firmware, did they update other things? And the answer is yes. Do they mean anything? The answer is no. So when Canon told us about this, I was like, maybe you guys shouldn't make a big deal out of this firmware update because people are gonna lambaste you if it didn't do anything different to changing the outcome for the overheating outside. The one firmware update that I do want to tell you about is kind of important because the movie recording time displayed when powering off/on the camera quickly between recording consecutive short videos at room temperature has been improved. So what that means is when you would get to the end of a clip and you did 15 minutes, you turn the camera off, you go to record again, and it's like, oh, you got 2 or 3 minutes to record again because the camera's kind of overheating. Well, that isn't like that anymore. You will get more time when you do turn the camera back on. So the first test that we wanted to do was see how these cameras handled outside with 1.0 firmware as well as 1.1 in 89-degree heat with a 96-degree heat index. And unfortunately, nothing changed. The cameras both shut off at exactly or pretty close to the same exact time. Now, Canon didn't say that we would get better times outdoors. They specifically said, and I quote, "The update is only a fix for room temperature recording." So we just wanted to see maybe we could get better results outdoors with 1.1 versus 1.0, and the answer was no. It didn't change anything outdoors in higher temperatures. So for the next test, we took the cameras indoors, and in order to cool them off, they ended up in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes to get them to cool down quicker so we could run the tests in 74-degree room temperature indoors. So the first test that we did indoors was in 4K HQ, which is the highest quality 4K you can get out of this camera. It gives you 8K downsampled to 4K, and we shot in 10-bit 422 C-Log at 24 frames per second, and the results actually gave us an extra 15 minutes with the new firmware camera for a total of roughly 45 minutes of runtime. Now, of course, it's not continuous runtime. It's 29:59, and then you have to start it again. So when we turned off the firmware 1.0 camera to try and reset it to shoot again after it overheated, it just blinked double zeros on the screen. So where I thought that this firmware was going to actually do nothing for overheating, it actually went ahead and gave us 15 extra minutes. So 45 minutes of record time, at least in this scenario. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody's hands were wrapped around the camera, because Steven's hands weren't wrapped around the camera. And if they were, Steven gives off a lot of heat. Maybe that will cut down on the runtime, but having it just set up in this 74-degree environment, it went for 45 minutes, of course, after that reset. So after letting the cameras cool down once again inside of the refrigerator, we went to 8K all-I 10-bit 422 C-Log, and the original firmware camera overheated after about 10 minutes, while the new firmware camera kept going until about 16 minutes when the card filled up. Now, after reformatting the card quickly, we got an additional 13 minutes after doing so, totaling 19 minutes more from the new firmware updated camera for a total of 29 continuous minutes of 8K in all-I. Now, when we say continuous, it's basically continuous. It filled up the card, we reformatted it, because the largest cards we have are 325 gigs from ProGrade. Reformat, start again, and it kept going. 29 minutes of 8K, that's pretty damn good. Let me jump in here real quick to show you FroPack 2 in action with multiple presets on one image. I'm gonna go to AC/DC, boom, great starting point. Then we're gonna go to Charmin, that gives you another really cool look. Cinnamon Toast Crunch, another unique, different look. Then we can go down here to Double Stuffed Oreos, gives you a nice black and white right off the rip. Then we can go down to Golden Grams. I love the way that Golden Grams looks on this one. And then we have Matte Black, high contrast, and matte black, low contrast. We created 15 all-new custom Lightroom presets that will help you speed up your raw workflow or give you a great starting point. Head on over to FroKnowsPhoto.com/FroPack2 because over there you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters. And if you decide to pick them up right now, they're currently on sale. Or if you pick up FroPack 1 and FroPack 2 as the FroPack bundle, you can save even more. Now, let's get back to the video. What about the highest quality 8K RAW recording internally? Well, after letting the cameras cool down once again inside of the refrigerator, we then started shooting and got 16 minutes and 30 seconds before the card filled up with all of that data. So after reformatting the card and starting again, we continued and got an additional 16 minutes and 3 seconds until the new firmware updated camera overheated, resulting in a total of 32 minutes and 33 seconds of nearly continuous 8K RAW record time internally, while the original firmware camera only gave us an extra 3 minutes before shutting down after the card filled. So that was after reformatting it and starting it again, it only gave us 3 minutes. Did you hear this? 32 minutes and 33 seconds of record time that's basically continuous in the room temperature environment. Is that long enough for you to shoot 8K RAW internally, everybody? Is that long enough for you? So if you're shooting 8K RAW, it's going to be better for you with the new updated 1.1 firmware. Are you able to get more time out of shooting 4K 120 frames per second 10-bit 422 C-Log? Well, we tried that out and we didn't see much of a major difference, but we did get an additional 2 minutes and 30 seconds out of the new firmware camera. So you get a little bit more out of it, but do you need to be shooting 17 minutes in a row of 4K 120 frames per second? The answer to that is probably no. So at the end of the day, we saw about a 50% jump in runtime in most modes and over 100% bump in runtime when filming in the 8K modes. Inside, in roughly 74-degree temperature, we saw a major improvement, which I was not expecting to see a major improvement from 1.1 firmware. I don't think there's a conspiracy out there from Canon to be like, oh, we're gonna lock this down and they did it on purpose. They're learning, they're putting out this new 1.1 firmware before most people even have the cameras. Did they hold up shipments? They tell us, well, actually, they weren't fully clear on whether they held up shipments. They just said that they got out a lot of the pre-orders that they had. Did they hold up shipments? If I had to guess, I'd probably say yes, they held up shipments a little. Now, that's my opinion and thoughts on the matter because they just want to make sure that the latest firmware is out. Now, there will be future firmware updates coming. Let me read what they're going to do for the R5, and the date is to be determined. They're going to add C-Log 3, add lower bitrate option for 8K RAW video recording. They're going to add lower bitrate option for the all IPB video recording modes, and they're going to add 120 frames per second at 1080p, which should have been there right off the rip anyway. So is this a major firmware update? Well, no, because it's just from 1.0 to 1.1, so technically no. But getting more record time out of that 8K, being able to stop recording and start again and not have the camera blink at you 0 zeros indoors. Did that one just shut off, Steven? So the old firmware just shut off when we're shooting 8K and the new one is still recording, still looking good?
Yeah, no overheating sign either.
No overheating sign, still recording good. That's why we set up both of these to show you. How long in is it?
18, 19 minutes.
About 18 or 19 minutes in since recording, starting this video. So there is a difference internally or inside when you're recording. They fixed some things. Now, will they get a fix for shooting outdoors where the heat is, well, obviously it's much hotter. Will they come up with something that allows you to just shoot and not worry about it as much? And by the way, we tried to reset the camera. It's still blinking zeros on the 1.0 firmware. So successful firmware update, even though I was skeptical at the beginning. Yes, in some ways it did fix something. Will they fix the other thing? That's the biggest question. Did they limit it on purpose to not ruin the camera? There is a hack out there that people have been talking about where they block the sensor on the door, on the bottom latch of the door, which allows them to pop out the battery while recording to then put it back in to trick the camera to think that it isn't overheating. I wouldn't do that. That could corrupt your video files, so what's the point of doing that? This firmware fixed one thing. Hopefully they will get other firmwares out quicker so that they can extend the time for shooting outdoors, or at least give you the option to say, you know what, I understand that it overheats, and if my camera melts, it's my fault, not your fault. Will that happen? I don't know, but hopefully in the next couple months, they will be able to ship a shit ton more cameras to you guys with the latest firmware, or that right out of the box, you will get better results, at least when it comes to shooting video. Now, we are going to be doing our real world review very soon, and we hope to have that out as soon as possible. That's going to go majorly in depth and give you a ton of information and our findings on the EOS R5. So just a quick update here. The camera with the 1.1 firmware shooting 8K all-eye is still recording after about 22 minutes without an overheating warning, whereas the one with 1.0 firmware in the same exact spot, because it's sitting right next to it, has already overheated. It shut off, and when we turned it back on, we are still blinking double zeros. So there you have it, guys. Please leave some questions, comments, concerns down below. Don't forget to like, share, and comment, and and subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. Jared, Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.